Hello everybody. This has been the Compost Guy, Christy, and I am finally providing an update for my Composting Rolls experiment. As you can see, this was started quite some time ago, almost exactly 5 months ago. It's funny how that often happens when I'm doing updates. It was October 4th, and it is now March 5th as I am filming this. And needless to say, things have changed in these composting roll bins. Now this is just one of them, very similar in the other one as well. But I'm just going to dump this out and kind of show you how things are looking. But before we get to that, I just want to kind of open up the bin and take a look. As you can see, the level has, not surprisingly, dropped down a lot. And what can we see looking around in here? There's some mushroom growth. Another one over here. There is a isopod. You can see various things that obviously haven't broken down, and that's perfectly normal. Nothing super earth-shattering right away, but obviously lots of really rich, dark, earthy stuff in there. So I'm just going to shut the camera off rather than throwing you on the ground like one of my other ones. I'm going to shut off the video and we will be back in a second once this has been dumped out. Alrighty, we are back, and I'm just getting ready to, I didn't want to take this off because I imagine that there's worms that are going to be moving out of the way pretty quickly once that light hits them. Okay. So that's what it looks like in there. Just put that back on. Now, right off the bat, I was kind of hoping I was going to encounter some of these other worms. This is not a red wiggler composting worm. This is some form of lumbricus soil or semi-soil worm. This is sort of, I would guess that this is a semi-epigeic worm, so not quite the same as the red worms that are soil, or just not soil dwellers. They tend to live in really, really rich organic matter up near the surface. This one would be a bit more of a litter worm. It would sort of live partially in soil, tend to be in habitats that have lots of organic matter, things like leaves and things like that, but not thriving quite as well in a typical composting system. So oftentimes they won't do all that great in a indoor worm bin. But in this particular case, this being a, very much a set it and forget it type of system, was not fiddled with really at all during that 5-month period. And so they actually did okay, and we'll see if we can find some more. But yeah, here is, it's a somewhat bigger worm. It isn't as big as the Lumbricus terrestris, which is the big Canadian nightcrawler. But you can see the size compared to this red worm here. And you see that the end of the tail? Now they have what's known as a beaver tail. These Lumbricus worms tend to. This one's not really showing it off, but usually when it sort of contracts down a bit, you can see it's almost like a paddle shape. I'm not getting that clear. It's sort of a flattened paddle-like tail end, whereas the red worm has more of a conical tail, and you can always pick up that orange or almost a yellowy tail tip region. And of course the coloration is pretty vivid, maroon kind of a color versus the other one, which was more of a brown. But just some quick tips about how they differ in appearance. What's this little guy? That looks like a little red worm, but you can see, 5 months later, you can still see this bedding at the bottom. And that, that doesn't concern me at all. That's pretty typical in a plastic bin. And this material is going to be fantastic to add to some other system. You can see you can start to see some leafy waste, and it's amazing how resistant they can be to breakdown. That's part of the reason I don't tend to use a lot of leaf wastes in my composting systems, in my worm composting systems. They tend to be really resistant, and you don't really see a whole lot of breakdown. You might even be better off just kind of hot composting them. But if you do have a pretty active system, if they're mulch and you're mixing with a variety of wastes, they'll certainly break down more quickly than we're seeing in this system. Remember, this was a hands-free system for pretty well 5 months. There's another one of these lumbricus worms. Tend to be a bit faster moving, and if you like fishing and want to raise a worm, it's not going to be as prolific as something like even a European nightcrawler, which is a relative of the red worm. But if you're patient, a worm like this could potentially work in a fairly passive indoor system. If you've got lots of organic matter like that. Something like the Canadian nightcrawler is an anisic worm. It's a deep burrowing worm, so definitely not as well suited for indoor systems. Might survive for a while, but you're certainly not going to see some serious breeding. They like deep burrows and soil. Whereas these ones, like I said, sort of a litter worm. There's another one. So yeah, I mean, it's looking, there's a red worm, again, looking like there could have been some actual breeding and hatching out of these other worms. But there's another one. That's quite a smaller one. So this might be a Lumbricus rubellus, maybe one of the other Lumbricus litter worms. These are sort of more common in these kind of, I would call it sort of like a semi-composting environment, sort of rich in organic matter, but not a very, very active, typical worm composting system. What you will find is that if you end up with worms like this in a typical worm bin that you're feeding regularly, that's getting quite warm, it's going to not be an ideal environment for those lumbricus worms. They'll often come up to the surface to get away from the heat, to find sort of cooler temperatures, and they'll just die off. So again, it does have to be a certain type of system in order for them to do fairly well. And even when they are doing well, again, their breeding is not going to be as quick as, oh, look at this. These red worms doing the deed. They're locked in a loving embrace. Pretty neat. So they are exchanging sperm, actually, hermaphrodites, exchanging sperm, and then the red worms are going to keep that in their storage vesicle, and then that's what they use to periodically create these little cocoons here. So I'm seeing lots and lots of rich earthy stuff, quite a lot of these lumbricus worms, quite a lot of the red worms, definitely more red worms is not surprising. But the reason I ended up with a lot of the lumbricus worms is that I was getting this material from some outdoor beds, some somewhat neglected outdoor beds. They weren't really active worm composting trenches. So they would have had quite a few of these, probably the material would have had quite a few of these in them, and maybe their cocoons as well. And they've done fine in this system, again, because it wasn't super active. So all in all, you remember there were actual composting rolls in the system that was set up. So it was basically this newsprint burritos, in a sense, that contained a waste mix kind of stacked in the system. You can see there isn't a whole lot of evidence other than I'm seeing newsprint. I'm seeing fragments of newsprint. I assume that maybe from the rolls. So yeah, like I wouldn't say this has been earth-shattering by any stretch of the imagination. One application, lots of worms in there. Oh, and look at that. You can see a soil centipede just kind of ran by there. There's a really rich ecosystem of organisms in here. And I think, again, it comes back to this being a pretty passive system. Didn't sort of put a whole lot of waste in there, didn't do a whole lot with it. So it kind of developed a nice little ecosystem. You can see a millipede there. There's a white worm right beside it. There's all sorts of creatures in here. This is a fantastic approach. I've written about insurance bins on the Red Room Composting website, and this would be a fantastic way to set up an insurance bin. It's been 5 months. I haven't had to do anything with this system, and can you imagine starting up a new worm bin with some of this material? I mean, it'd be no problem. You've got all kinds of worms, different sizes, and who knows how many worms I'm not seeing. There's cocoons, there's this rich diversity of organisms, and this is a completely hands-free system. No hassles, no fruit flies all over the place, all these different things that people worry about when it comes to keeping bins indoors. You don't have to worry about that stuff. So just goes to show that some form of passive insurance bin is a great strategy. If you're a bit worried about what might happen in an outdoor system, it's a great way to go. In terms of actual composting, yeah, it's all right. You know, this is nice, rich stuff, but it's not kind of earth-shattering. And in 5 months' time, we could have done a whole lot more with an active system. We could have been producing lots of worm castings, richer material. But all in all, I do like this approach, and I think I may try it again. Maybe I'll switch things up a bit in terms of what I actually add in the composting rolls. But yeah, overall, really cool, and I'm glad I tested this out. Hope you found this interesting. Once again, this has been the Compost Guy, Christy, and I'm sure we'll be talking again soon.